Let me ask you something uncomfortable. When was the last time you walked out of a room and thought, that's not what I meant at all? Maybe it was a job interview where the words came out tangled, and you watched the interviewer's expression shift from interested to polite. Maybe it was a meeting where you had the answer. You knew you had it. But by the time you finished speaking, three other people had already moved on. Or maybe it was something smaller but sharper. A moment with someone you care about, where you said the wrong version of the right thing, and the damage was done before you even realized it. Here's the truth nobody tells you. Your ideas are only as powerful as your ability to express them. You can be the smartest person in the building. You can have the most innovative solution, the most creative vision, the deepest insight. And if you can't articulate it cleanly, confidently, compellingly, it doesn't matter. The world doesn't reward the best ideas. It rewards the best expressed ones. That gap between what you think and what comes out of your mouth, that's not a personality flaw. It's not a sign that you're not cut out for leadership, for influence, for being heard. It's a skill gap. And skill gaps can be closed. Right now, roughly 1% of people communicate at a level that actually moves others. They get the promotions, they win the negotiations, they lead the rooms. They don't just speak, they land. And the brutal part, most of them weren't born that way. They learned a set of frameworks, practiced them deliberately, and made them automatic. That's exactly what this is going to do for you. Over the next sections, you're going to get the complete blueprint, not just tips, not vague advice about being more confident, but the actual mechanical frameworks that transform unclear, hesitant, rambling speech into communication that cuts through noise and makes people lean in. Let's start where everything starts. Inside your head. Chapter 1. The Mental Rewire. Why your current framework is working against you. Most people who struggle with articulation make the same foundational mistake. They think the problem is vocabulary or nerves or not being naturally charismatic. So they try to fix the symptoms. They look up better words. They practice in the mirror. They tell themselves to slow down. And then they get into the actual conversation and it falls apart anyway. Because the real problem isn't any of those things. The real problem is a broken mental model of what communication actually is. Here's what most people believe unconsciously. If I just say what's in my head, the other person will understand me. That belief is the root of almost every communication failure you've ever experienced. Your brain stores information in a dense, compressed, highly personal format, connected to your specific memories, your specific emotional associations, your specific logic chains. When you try to transmit that directly to another person's brain, it's like sending a file in a format they can't open. The information is all there, but they can't access it. The first mental shift. Communication is not transmission, it's translation. Your job isn't to output your thoughts. Your job is to convert your thoughts into a format that works for this specific person in this specific moment with their specific frame of reference. That's a fundamentally different task. And once you internalize it, you stop focusing on what you want to say and start focusing on what they need to hear. Think about it this way. A skilled chef doesn't just cook the food they personally love. They understand the palate of whoever is sitting at the table. The ingredients might be the same. The skill might be the same. But the presentation, the seasoning, the pacing, the portion, is calibrated to the person eating. That's what great communicators do with language. The second mental shift, clarity, comes from subtraction, not addition. There's a deeply ingrained cultural belief that complexity signals intelligence. Use big words, construct elaborate sentences, layer your argument with qualifications and caveats. And people will think you're smart, right? Wrong. They'll think you're unclear. The most respected communicators in every field, medicine, law, technology, finance, are the ones who can take something genuinely complicated and make it feel simple. Not dumbed down, distilled. There's an enormous difference. Dumbing something down means removing the substance. Distilling it means removing everything that isn't substance. When Richard Feynman explained quantum physics to non-scientists, he didn't use fewer ideas. He used fewer unnecessary words. When Warren Buffett writes his annual letters, he deliberately writes them as if he's talking to a smart friend with no financial background. The intelligence shows up in the clarity, not the complexity. Your goal in every single communication, every email, every meeting, every conversation should be, how do I make this impossible to misunderstand? The third mental shift, confidence isn't about being right. It's about being clear about what you think and why. Most articulation anxiety comes from a fear of being wrong. People hedge, they overqualify, they trail off mid-sentence, not because they lack ideas, but because they're terrified of committing to a position that might be challenged or rejected. But here's what's counterintuitive. People don't respect certainty nearly as much as they respect clarity of reasoning. You can be wrong and still be compelling if you can clearly explain your thinking process. You can be uncertain and still be credible if you can articulate the specific nature of your uncertainty. The person who says, "I'm not sure, but my instinct is X because of Y and Z, and here's what would change my mind," is infinitely more compelling than the person who vaguely says, "I guess it might be something like," and trails off. The fourth mental shift, thinking and speaking are different activities, and trying to do them simultaneously is costing you enormously. Watch what happens when most people are asked an unexpected question in a meeting or conversation. They start talking immediately, and you can literally watch them figure out what they're going to say as the words come out. The sentence changes direction halfway through. The logic doesn't quite connect. Filler words appear like scaffolding holding up a structure that hasn't been built yet. Professional communicators, the ones who seem effortlessly clear, do their thinking before they start speaking, not hours before. Sometimes just 2 or 3 seconds before, but those seconds make an enormous difference. They use micropauses, brief, intentional silences, to organize their thoughts into a clean structure. Then they deliver them. No scaffolding, no mid-sentence corrections, just a clear, complete thought expressed from start to finish. The fifth mental shift. Communication is something you control, not something that happens to you. I'm just not good with words. I've never been a natural speaker. I get nervous and my mind goes blank. These statements feel like descriptions of fixed reality. They're not. They're stories. Stories that happen to be convenient because they remove responsibility. If communication ability is innate, like height or eye color, then you don't have to do anything about it. You're just not that person. But the evidence is overwhelming. Every exceptional communicator you've ever admired developed that ability through practice, through specific frameworks. through deliberate repetition until those frameworks became invisible, absorbed into automatic behavior. The people who articulate clearly didn't unlock some hidden talent. They built a skill. And the single most important thing you can do right now is stop treating your communication patterns as identity and start treating them as habits. Habits that can be changed, upgraded, and replaced. Once these 5 mental shifts are in place, everything else accelerates. Because you're no longer fighting yourself. You're no longer trying to force imprecise thinking through a broken model. You've got the right foundation. Now you can build. Chapter 2. The Power of the Pause, Your Most Underused Communication Tool. Here's something that might sound strange. One of the most powerful things you can do to improve your articulation costs you nothing, requires no vocabulary upgrade, and takes effect immediately. It's silence. Not uncomfortable silence, not empty silence. Strategic silence. Deliberate, purposeful pauses placed exactly where they need to be to give your words maximum impact. Most people are running from silence. The moment there's a gap in conversation, they rush to fill it. With filler words, with half-formed thoughts, with words that don't go anywhere. And that fear of silence is quietly destroying their credibility every single day. Here's why silence feels so threatening. Most people confuse it with incompetence. They think a pause signals that they don't know what they're saying, that they're unprepared, that they're losing the thread, so they keep talking. And in trying to avoid looking unprepared, they produce exactly the kind of tangled, filler-heavy speech that actually does sound unprepared. The irony is brutal, and it's worth sitting with. The behavior you use to hide uncertainty creates more uncertainty than silence would. The people who own rooms, the leaders, the expert advisors, the TED speakers who seem to have effortless presence, they don't rush, they pause. And those pauses do extraordinary work. The thinking pause. This is the pause you take before you begin speaking. When someone asks you a question, instead of launching immediately into a response, you take 1 to 3 seconds. You breathe. You identify your main point. You decide how you want to structure your answer. Then you begin. To you, that 3 seconds might feel like an eternity. But to the person asking, it signals something completely different. This person takes my question seriously enough to actually think before answering. That's not weakness. That's credibility. Try this in your next 3 conversations. When someone asks you something, anything, even something casual, resist the automatic response. Take 1 breath, organize, then speak. You'll notice immediately that your first words are more precise, your direction is clearer, and you produce almost no filler words, because you already know where you're going. The emphasis, pause. This pause comes after you've made an important point, and it's the pause that most people skip entirely. You state something significant, a key insight, a critical recommendation, a number that matters. And then you immediately continue speaking, and the important thing gets swallowed by everything that comes after it. Professional speakers place a 1 to 2 second pause immediately after their most important statements. Not before. After. This creates a moment of focused attention. Your listener's brain registers that something significant just happened, and the pause gives them space to absorb it before you move on. Watch any skilled speaker closely. The pause after the point is as deliberate as the point itself. They're not hesitating. They're letting the idea land. The transition pause. This is the pause that separates one idea from the next. Think of it as the paragraph break in your spoken communication. When you rush from point to point without any pause, which most people do, your ideas blur together. The listener can't tell where one thought ends and the next begins. They're trying to follow your logic while you're already 3 ideas ahead of them. A brief pause at the transition says, "That thought is complete and a new one is beginning." It gives your listener's brain a moment to file the previous idea before accepting the next one. Especially in complex explanations or multi-part arguments. This pause is what keeps your listener with you instead of behind you. The listening pause. This one happens after someone else finishes speaking, and it might be the most underrated pause of all. Most people, while someone else is talking, are already composing their response. They're half listening because they're half focused on what they're about to say, which means they frequently respond to what they expected the person to say rather than what the person actually said. A genuine listening pause, 2 to 3 seconds after someone finishes before you respond, does 3 things simultaneously. It ensures they've actually finished. It gives you time to process what was truly said. And it signals to the other person that you value their words enough to actually think about them before replying. That signal alone, the signal of genuine listening, dramatically increases how much people trust and respect your communication. How to practice. Start by recording yourself. 10 minutes of natural conversation or explaining an idea you know well. Then play it back and count your fill of words. Count how many times you rush a transition. Count how many times you state something important and then immediately bury it with the next sentence. Most people are genuinely shocked by this exercise. Not because they're bad communicators, but because the gap between how they think they sound and how they actually sound is enormous. That gap is your opportunity. Once you have the baseline, start practicing the thinking pause in low-stakes conversations. Ask yourself to pause before responding to your next 5 text messages before you type. Pause before answering your next casual question. Build the reflex in small moments so it's available in the big ones. Then practice the emphasis. Pause by reading compelling passages aloud. Speeches, well-written articles, anything with substance. Find the natural landing points. Practice letting the silence do its work. Chapter 3. Building your vocabulary from the inside out. Most vocabulary advice is backwards. It tells you to learn new words. Download a Word of the Day app. Read the dictionary. Memorize a list of impressive synonyms. Then deploy these words in conversation to sound more intelligent and precise. And then you try it, and it feels stilted, forced, like wearing someone else's clothes. Because that approach treats vocabulary like decoration, something you add on top of your communication to make it look better. Real vocabulary development is about precision, not performance. Here's the distinction that changes everything. There's a difference between knowing a word and being able to use a word with fluency. Most people have a passive vocabulary. Words they can recognize and understand when they encounter them. That's 3 to 5 times larger than their active vocabulary, the words they actually use when speaking. The goal isn't to memorize more words. It's to activate the ones you already know, and to understand their exact weight, their connotations, their emotional register, the subtle shades of meaning that make one word right and another word almost right. The precision gap. Consider 3 words: confident, arrogant, and self-assured. Most people could tell you they're related. Fewer people could tell you exactly how they differ. And fewer still could deploy the right one instinctively in a sentence. Confident is neutral, factual, a statement about internal state. Arrogant carries judgment. It implies that confidence has tipped into something off-putting, something that dismisses others. Self-assured is more settled, less performative. It suggests confidence that doesn't need external validation. When you use confident where self-assured would be more accurate, you're communicating at lower resolution than your idea deserves. It's not wrong, but it's not precise, and precision is what turns good communication into great communication. The active integration method. Instead of memorizing word lists, start by identifying the concepts you communicate about most frequently. What are your core topics? Professionally, personally, in the conversations that matter most to you. Map them out. Then, for each core topic, build a precision vocabulary, a set of words that let you express the subtle distinctions that currently escape you. For emotional states, instead of defaulting to frustrated, ask yourself, am I exasperated, worn down by repeated obstacles, or perplexed, genuinely confused by something contradictory, or disillusioned, disappointed because something I believed in didn't hold up? Each of these creates a different picture. Each of them tells the listener something different. And when you use the right one, there's a recognition, a moment, where the other person thinks, yes, that's exactly it. That recognition is connection. For professional contexts, instead of, we should do this differently, consider, optimize, pivot, restructure, recalibrate, streamline. Each of these signals a different kind of change with different implications. Optimize suggests refinement within a working system. Pivot suggests a directional shift. Restructure implies deeper reorganization. When you choose the precise word, you communicate not just what you think should happen, but how and why, in a single word. The replacement method. Here's the most practical technique for activating your vocabulary. Identify the 5 generic words you overuse most and systematically replace them. Most people lean heavily on good, bad, interesting thing, really. These words are communication placeholders. They signal that you have an idea but haven't fully committed to expressing it precisely. When you catch yourself about to say interesting, stop, ask, what kind of interesting? Compelling. Does it pull you in? Counterintuitive? Does it challenge an assumption? Revealing? Does it expose something previously hidden? Provocative. Does it make you want to argue with it? Each of these is more accurate than interesting. Each gives your listener more information. Each makes your thinking clearer without requiring you to add more words. Try this for 1 week. Eliminate really as an intensifier. Replace really good with exceptional, outstanding, or impressive. Replace really bad with inadequate, counterproductive, or damaging. Notice what happens to your speech. It becomes more precise, more confident, and paradoxically more efficient, because strong, specific words carry more meaning than weak words plus intensifiers. The analogy collection. Analogies are the most powerful precision tool in communication. When you find the right analogy, it doesn't just explain an idea, it transfers understanding in a way that abstract description never can. Start collecting them. When you encounter an analogy that makes something suddenly clear, in a book, in a conversation, in a talk you're watching, write it down. Note what concept it explains and why it works. Then, for the complex ideas you communicate about most often, build your own analogies. Test them. Refine them. The best analogy feels like a key sliding into a lock. There's a satisfying click of recognition when it works. And here's what most people miss about analogies. They're not just explanatory tools, they're trust tools. When you find an analogy that lands, your listener doesn't just understand you better, they feel known by you. Because a good analogy says, I understand your frame of reference well enough to meet you there. Chapter 4. The structure formula that never fails. Here's a scenario you've probably lived through. Someone asks you a question, a good question, one you actually know the answer to, and you start talking. You cover the main point. Then you remember a detail that's important, so you add that. Then you realize you should have given some context first, so you back up. Then you're not sure if you've made yourself clear, so you say it again a different way, and then you kind of trail off. And the person nods politely, and you have absolutely no idea whether they understood you or just decided to move on. That's not an intelligence problem. That's a structure problem. The difference between people who communicate clearly and people who don't almost always comes down to one thing. Clear communicators organize before they speak. Unclear communicators try to organize while they speak. One of these produces a well-planned journey. The other produces wandering. The good news, genuinely good news, is that structure isn't something you're born with. It's a set of templates. And once you have the right templates wired into your brain, organizing your thoughts before you speak takes seconds, not minutes. Here are the 5 structures that cover almost every communication situation you'll ever face. Structure number 1, the PREP formula. PREP stands for point, reason, example, point, and it's the single most versatile communication structure in existence. You lead with your main point, stated clearly and concisely, 1 or 2 sentences maximum. Then you give the primary reason this point is valid or important. Then you give a specific, concrete example that illustrates the reasoning. Then you restate the point to close the loop and make it memorable. This structure keeps you on track, makes your logic visible to the listener, and ensures your main message doesn't get lost in the middle of your explanation. Here's what it looks like in real life. Imagine a colleague asks you, "Do you think we should move this project deadline back?" Without structure, most people would say something like, "Well, there's a lot going on right now and the team is kind of stretched, and I think maybe it could be worth considering, although obviously there are trade-offs." With PREP, "Yes, I think we should extend the deadline by 2 weeks. Point. The team is currently splitting attention between this project and the client emergency that came up last week, which means neither is getting the focus it needs." Reason. We saw this same dynamic happen with a Henderson project in March. We pushed through on the original timeline and ended up with 3 rounds of revisions that cost us more time than an extension would have. Example. So my recommendation is a 2-week extension to protect the quality of the final output. Point restated. That's it. Clean, complete, credible. For more complex topics, use layered PREP. Your overarching PREP holds the main argument, and each supporting point gets its own mini PREP inside it. This creates a nested structure that can carry sophisticated ideas without ever losing clarity. Structure number 2, the chronological framework. This is your go-to structure for explaining processes, describing how something developed, or walking someone through a sequence of events. The critical discipline with chronological structure is resisting the urge to jump around. Provide any necessary context at the beginning before the sequence starts, and then commit to a clean linear progression. Use explicit transition phrases first, then after that, which led to, ultimately. These aren't just filler, they're road signs that prevent your listener from getting lost. The most common mistake with this structure is inserting background information mid-sequence. The moment you say, "And actually, before I go further, I should mention that back in 2019, you've broken the thread. Your listener has to mentally pause, store what you just said, absorb the backstory, and then try to reconnect to where you were. Some of them won't make it back. Front load the context, then sequence, then land. Structure number 3, the problem-solution framework. This structure is exceptionally powerful for persuasive communication, and the reason is psychological. It mirrors how human brains naturally process challenges. We identify a problem, we experience discomfort, we seek relief. A well-built problem-solution structure takes your listener through that exact arc. Start by describing the problem in terms that feel real and specific to your audience. Don't abstract it. Don't soften it. Let it land. Make them feel the weight of it, not through exaggeration, but through precision. Then introduce the solution, specifically how it addresses the core of what you just described. Not vaguely, not "we should improve communication," but exactly what changes, exactly how those changes address the problem, and exactly what the outcome looks like. Then critically address the most likely objections. This is where most people skip a step. They present the problem and the solution and then stop, as if the listener has no concerns. Anticipating objections and addressing them proactively doesn't weaken your case. It strengthens it. It signals that you've thought this through from multiple angles, not just your own. Structure number 4, the comparison framework. When you need to help someone choose between options or understand why one approach is better than another, the comparison framework is your best tool. The key principle: establish the evaluation criteria first. Before you compare anything, tell the listener what factors matter and why. This does 2 things. It gives them a lens through which to understand everything you're about to say, and it anchors the conversation in shared values before you start advocating for any particular option. Then compare each option systematically, using the same criteria in the same order every time. This might feel mechanical, but it dramatically reduces cognitive load for your listener. They're not trying to hold a chaotic set of data points in working memory. They're following a structured grid. And here's the subtle power of this structure. When your criteria are genuinely relevant and your analysis is honest, the right conclusion often emerges naturally. You don't have to push. The structure does the persuading. Structure number 5, the cause and effect framework. This structure is essential for explaining why things happen or predicting what will happen if certain conditions are met. Start with the situation or context. Then walk systematically through the causal chain, using language that makes the connections explicit, because which led to, as a result, consequently, and therefore. Be precise about causation versus correlation. Don't claim that 2 things being related means one caused the other. And be transparent when you're making a prediction rather than describing a proven outcome. The discipline this framework requires is intellectual honesty. It's easy to oversimplify causal chains, to skip steps, to assume the connection is obvious when it isn't. The willingness to trace the logic explicitly, step by step, is what makes this structure genuinely illuminating rather than just persuasive. How to practice. Pick one structure this week, just one, and use it deliberately in your conversations. Notice how it feels to have a clear destination when you start speaking. Notice the difference in how people respond when your thoughts arrive organized. Then, for any important conversation coming up, a meeting, a difficult discussion, a presentation, spend 5 minutes beforehand choosing your structure and roughing out your main points within it. Not scripting, roughing out. You'll walk into that conversation with a kind of quiet confidence that has nothing to do with personality and everything to do with preparation. With consistent practice, structure stops being something you consciously apply and becomes the invisible scaffolding of your communication. Always there, always working, completely automatic. Chapter 5. Reading the room like a master. You can have perfect structure, you can have precise vocabulary, you can have strategic pauses placed exactly right, and your communication can still completely miss because it's aimed at the wrong target. The most perfectly crafted message in the world fails if it doesn't match what your audience needs in the moment they're in with the context they're carrying. Reading the room isn't a soft skill. It's a technical one, a set of specific observations and adjustments that the best communicators make continuously, often without conscious thought, because they've practiced it long enough that it's become instinctive. Here's how to build that instinct deliberately. Layer 1. Read. Before you speak, before you open your mouth in any significant conversation or setting, spend 30 seconds observing, not performing, not mentally rehearsing. Observing. What's the energy level in the room? Are people alert and engaged, or are they drained? Is the atmosphere formal or informal, collaborative or tense? What do people seem to be hoping for from this interaction? Quick answers or depth? Are they already familiar with the topic or coming in cold? These observations should fundamentally shape how you begin, how much context you provide, how fast you move, and how much complexity you introduce. You're not adapting your core message. You're adapting the delivery vehicle to match the road conditions. Think of it like a GPS recalculating. The destination is the same, but the route adjusts based on what's actually in front of you. Layer 2. Energy matching. One of the most immediate ways to create or destroy rapport in communication is the alignment, or misalignment, between your energy and your audience's energy. Walk into a room of people who are excited and energized and deliver your message with flat, measured calm, and you'll feel the disconnect immediately. They'll disengage not because your content is wrong, but because your register doesn't match theirs. Conversely, bring high energy to a group that's tired, stressed, or dealing with something heavy, and you'll come across as tone deaf. They need steadiness, not enthusiasm. Energy matching isn't performance or manipulation. It's social intelligence, the recognition that how you feel in a conversation is partly determined by how the person across from you communicates. When you match someone's energy appropriately, you signal, "I see where you are right now. I'm meeting you there." That signal on its own builds more trust than almost anything you could say. Layer 3. Knowledge calibration. Misjudging your audience's expertise level is one of the most common and most damaging communication errors. Explain basics to an expert and you'll lose them within 30 seconds. They'll stop listening not because they're arrogant, but because their brain has already cataloged the information you're sharing and moved on. Use advanced concepts with someone who's new to the topic, and you'll confuse and discourage them, and they'll often be too polite to tell you. The skill is quick, accurate assessment, and the best way to do it is through early strategic questions and careful observation of the response. Ask something that tests the water, a question that can be answered simply by a beginner or in depth by an expert. Then pay attention not just to the content of the answer, but to the vocabulary they use, the confidence of their delivery, the assumptions embedded in their response. When in doubt, start with a slightly simpler baseline than you think you need, and add complexity in response to what you observe. It's far easier to accelerate into depth than to recover from losing someone in the first 2 minutes. Layer 4. Attention signal recognition. People tell you constantly whether they're following you. They just don't use words to do it. Engagement signals: sustained eye contact, forward body lean, responsive nodding, questions that build on what you've said, facial expressions of recognition or curiosity. Disengagement signals: glancing at phones or watches, shifting weight frequently, eyes that wander to the middle distance, questions that reveal they've missed a key point, the polite but empty nod that comes when someone has stopped processing and is just waiting for you to finish. Most people notice these signals vaguely and then push forward anyway, partly out of anxiety, partly because they don't know what to do with the information. Master communicators treat these signals as data and adjust in real time. When you notice attention dropping, don't speed up or add more content. Do the opposite. Pause. Ask a question that re-engages. Summarize your key point more crisply, or simply change your pace or energy level. Sometimes that's enough to pull people back in. Layer 5. Comprehension versus confusion. There's a specific expression people make when they understand something. A subtle brightening, a slight forward movement, a relaxation in the brow. And there's a different expression they make when they're confused but don't want to admit it. The slightly too enthusiastic nod, the eyes that aren't quite focused, the question that doesn't quite follow from what you said. Learn to distinguish these. They're different signals that require completely different responses. And here's a critical technique. Don't ask, "Does that make sense?" It's the least useful comprehension check in existence. Almost everyone says yes, regardless of whether anything made sense. They say yes because saying no feels like admitting failure. Instead, ask them to reflect the concept back. How would you explain that to your team? Or how does that connect to what you're currently working on? These questions don't just check comprehension. They deepen it because articulating something you've just learned consolidates your understanding of it. Layer 6. Emotional state awareness. A person who is upset, anxious, or overwhelmed cannot effectively process new information or make good decisions. The emotional brain is running too hot. The rational, analytical processing that you need them to engage for your message to land. It's not available. In these situations, the worst thing you can do is push forward with your agenda. The best thing you can do is address the emotional reality first. This doesn't mean becoming a therapist or derailing the conversation. It means a brief, genuine acknowledgement. It sounds like this has been a stressful week. Before we get into the details, is there anything I should know that might be affecting where your head is at? That acknowledgement does something remarkable. It lowers the emotional temperature, it signals safety, and it creates the conditions for your actual communication to be received, which is, after all, the entire point. The advanced layer, guiding the room. Once you can read the room, the next level is shaping it. When people are scattered and unfocused, your structure and pace can bring them together. When they're skeptical, your willingness to name their concerns directly before they raise them can shift the dynamic. When they're overwhelmed, breaking your content into smaller, more digestible pieces can transform the atmosphere from anxiety to confidence. You're not manipulating anyone. You're using your communication skill to create the conditions in which genuine understanding is possible. That's not just good technique. That's genuine service. Chapter 6. Eliminating verbal clutter forever. There's a version of you that speaks with surgical precision. Every word earns its place, every sentence moves somewhere, every idea lands cleanly without fog, without noise, without the verbal static that makes people half listen instead of fully engage. That version of you isn't a different person. It's the same person, minus the clutter. Because here's what most people don't realize. Verbal clutter isn't a sign of having too many thoughts. It's a sign of not having processed those thoughts enough before speaking. The clutter is the processing happening out loud, in real time, in front of your audience, and your audience is paying a tax for it. In attention, in comprehension, in the unconscious judgment they make about your credibility. The fastest way to sound more intelligent, more confident, and more authoritative isn't to add anything to your communication. It's to remove what's already there that shouldn't be. The filler word problem. Like, sort of, kind of. Basically, right? These words have no communicative value. They don't inform, clarify, or connect. They exist entirely to fill the gap between thoughts, to cover the silence that most people fear so deeply they'd rather fill it with noise than let it exist for 2 seconds. And the damage they do is disproportionate to how small they seem. Research consistently shows that filler words undermine perceived competence and confidence, not dramatically, but steadily, cumulatively. Every chips away slightly at the listener's sense that you know what you're talking about. Every like makes you sound slightly younger, slightly less authoritative, slightly less worth following. The average person uses a filler word every 7 to 10 words. That means in a 2-minute explanation, they might use 20 to 30 meaningless sounds. 20 to 30 moments where their listener's brain registers noise instead of signal. The first step is honest self-assessment. Record yourself for 10 minutes, talking through an idea you know well or having a natural conversation. Then listen back and count. Don't estimate. Count every single filler word. Mark which ones appear most frequently. Most people have 2 or 3 favorites. Their default fillers, the ones they reach for without any awareness. Identifying yours is the prerequisite for eliminating them. The replacement is simple but uncomfortable. Silence. Not an explanation. Not a different word. Just a pause. When you feel the urge to say, you pause instead. When like is about to appear in the middle of a sentence where it doesn't belong, you pause instead. The discomfort is real. That silence will feel much longer to you than it does to your listener. But your listener isn't experiencing it as incompetence. They're experiencing it as thoughtfulness. They're waiting for what comes next, not judging the space before it. Practice this in low-stakes conversations. First, with friends, with family, in casual settings where nothing is at risk. Build the reflex in comfortable environments so it's available in high-stakes ones. The hedging trap hedge phrases are the verbal equivalent of writing in pencil because you're afraid to commit to ink, I think. Maybe. Sort of. Kind of, I guess. Probably. I'm not sure, but I could be wrong. But used appropriately, when genuine uncertainty exists, these phrases are honest and useful. Used excessively, which is how most people use them, they systematically undermine every idea you express. Here's the pattern. Someone has a clear opinion, a real perspective, based on real experience or real reasoning. And then they wrap it in so many qualifiers that by the time it exits their mouth, it barely exists. I kind of think that maybe we should probably consider possibly trying a different approach. What is the listener supposed to do with that? They can't agree with it. There's nothing solid enough to agree with. They can't push back on it. There's nothing defined enough to push back on. It just evaporates. Compare it to, I think we need a different approach. Same underlying thought, completely different impact. The distinction that matters here is between genuine uncertainty and performative humility. Genuine uncertainty, I don't have enough data to be confident about this, deserves honest expression. Performative humility, hedging not because you're uncertain, but because you're afraid of being wrong or seeming arrogant, serves nobody. When you genuinely don't know something, say so directly. I don't have enough information on that yet is clear, honest, and credible. When you do have knowledge and perspective, express it clearly, without a layer of qualifications designed to give you somewhere to hide if challenged. The rule: hedge when the uncertainty is real. Commit when it isn't. The intensifier inflation problem. Very, really, totally, absolutely, extremely, incredibly. These words exist to add emphasis. But when you use them constantly, which most people do, they have the opposite effect. They inflate your language without adding meaning, and inflated language is like inflated currency. The more of it you produce, the less each unit is worth. This is really, really important is weaker than this is critical. Not because critical is a fancier word, but because it carries the weight of importance inside itself. Without needing external inflation, strong, precise words don't need intensifiers. They do the work alone. Try this experiment. For 1 full week, eliminate every intensifier from your speech. No very, no really, no extremely. When you want to convey magnitude or importance, you have to find a word that does it inherently. What happens is revealing. You'll pause more before speaking because you have to think more carefully about exactly what you mean. You'll reach for more specific vocabulary because vague words suddenly have nowhere to hide without their intensifiers. And your speech will become noticeably cleaner, more precise, and more authoritative almost immediately. Weak openings and unnecessary qualifiers. 2 more forms of clutter worth targeting specifically. Weak openings are the throat-clearing phrases that begin your responses before the actual response starts. Well, so Okay, so that's a great question. Yeah, these openings signal tentativeness. They tell your listener, before you've said anything substantive, that you're not quite sure of yourself, and they waste the most valuable real estate in any piece of communication, the very beginning, when attention is highest. Practice starting with your first substantive word. When someone asks your opinion, your first word should be the beginning of your opinion, not a warm-up for it. Unnecessary qualifiers are phrases like, to be honest, personally, in my opinion, and if I'm being completely transparent. The problem with these phrases is what they imply by their existence, that you're not always honest, that your other statements aren't personal, that transparency is the exception rather than the rule. Everything you say is inherently your perspective unless you indicate otherwise. Flagging it as such with every statement doesn't add information. It creates a subtle, nagging question about the statements where you don't use the flag. The systematic elimination process. Don't try to fix everything at once. That's how you end up so focused on your speech patterns that you can't focus on your actual content, which produces even worse communication. Instead, work sequentially. One type of clutter per week. Week 1, filler words. Identify your top 2 and replace them with pauses. Week 2, hedge phrases. Notice every time you qualify unnecessarily and practice committing instead. Week 3, intensifiers. Eliminate them entirely and find stronger vocabulary to carry the weight. Week 4, week openings. Start with substance. By week 4, you'll be speaking with a cleanliness that most people never achieve, not because you learned anything exotic, but because you've systematically removed the noise that was drowning out your signal. And here's the thing about clean communication that most people discover with some surprise. It feels better to produce. The mental energy you were spending on verbal scaffolding gets redirected to your actual ideas. You feel more present in conversations. You feel more confident because you're not constantly listening to yourself create clutter and quietly cringing. The clutter was always the problem. Removing it was always the solution. The only question was whether you were willing to do the honest work of finding it first. Chapter 7. The storytelling advantage made personal. Let's be direct about something. Facts inform, data educates, logic convinces the part of the brain that wants to be convinced. But none of them, not one, creates the kind of connection that makes your communication stick, that makes someone think about what you said 3 days after the conversation ended, that makes them repeat your ideas to other people in your words with genuine enthusiasm. That's what stories do. And more specifically, that's what your stories do. The ones that come from your actual experience, your actual mistakes, your actual moments of learning and growth. The most persuasive thing you can say in almost any conversation isn't an argument. It's an honest account of something real that happened to you. Here's the neuroscience behind why. When a person hears a well-told personal account, their brain doesn't just process the information abstractly, it simulates the experience. The same neural regions that would fire if they were living through the situation themselves become active. They don't just understand what you went through. They briefly feel it, and feeling something is an order of magnitude more persuasive than understanding it. This is why a single specific example from your personal experience will outperform a dozen statistics on the same topic. The statistics address the rational mind. The example addresses the whole person. the challenge-action-result framework. For most communication situations, this three-part structure is all you need. You describe a specific situation or challenge, concrete, sensory, grounded in reality. You explain what you did or decided in response to it, and you reveal what resulted, including, crucially, what you learned. The power is in the specificity. "I once had a difficult client" is not a story. 3 years ago, I was managing a product launch for a client who changed the core requirements 4 weeks before the delivery date. That's a story. The specificity creates credibility. It signals that this actually happened, not that you're constructing a plausible scenario. And the lesson should emerge from the experience rather than being announced before it. Don't front-load the moral. Let the situation unfold, let the result land, and then draw the connection to your current point. This mirrors how real learning happens. Through experience first, insight second. And it's far more compelling than leading with a conclusion and then retrofitting an example. The vulnerability balance. Personal stories are most powerful when they include moments of failure, confusion, or genuine difficulty. Not because audiences enjoy watching people struggle, but because struggle is the universal experience. Everyone in your audience has failed at something. Everyone has been confused, has made a decision they regret, has faced a moment where they didn't know what to do. When you share those moments honestly, something shifts in the room. Walls come down. Defenses lower. People stop evaluating you and start relating to you. But, and this is the balance, the failure has to be framed as a passage, not a destination. The story should move from difficulty to insight, from mistake to growth. Not because you need to pretend everything worked out perfectly, but because that movement, from challenge to understanding, is what makes the experience useful to the person listening. "I failed at my first attempt to lead a team" is the raw material. When I failed at leading my first team, I discovered that I'd been confusing activity with direction. I was moving fast but not pointing anywhere. That failure completely changed how I understand leadership. That's the story. One is a confession. The other is a gift. The detail selection principle. Great personal communication doesn't include everything. It includes the right things, the specific details that make the experience vivid and real, and nothing that doesn't serve that purpose. When you tell someone about a meaningful experience, you don't need to describe everything that happened. You need to describe the details that transport them into the moment, the detail that captures the atmosphere, the specific thing someone said that changed everything, the exact feeling you had when you realized something important. Sensory details are your most powerful tool here. Not, "It was a stressful morning," but "I was sitting in my car in the parking lot, engine still running, rehearsing the conversation for the third time." Not, "The meeting didn't go well, but I watched the room go quiet in a way that told me everything I needed to know." Those details don't slow the story down. They make it real, and real is what creates connection. The discipline is in leaving out what doesn't serve the point. Every detail you include should either make the experience more vivid or move the listener closer to the insight you're building toward. Everything else, however true, however interesting to you, gets cut. Building your personal story library. Here's a practical exercise that will permanently change how you communicate. Take 30 minutes and write down 10 experiences from your personal or professional life that taught you something real. not heroic moments, learning moments, times you got something wrong, times you were surprised, times something difficult turned into something valuable, times a belief you held was challenged or overturned. For each one, identify what was the challenge, what did you do, what resulted, and what did you understand afterward that you didn't understand before. These 10 stories are the foundation of your personal communication library. Over time, you'll add to this library new experiences, new insights, new moments of genuine learning. And as it grows, you'll find that you have natural, specific, honest examples for almost any point you need to make in almost any conversation. You'll never again be in a meeting thinking, I wish I had an example for this. You'll have a library, and a library, as any communicator eventually discovers, is one of the most powerful things you can own. Chapter 8. Handling resistance and difficult conversations. There's a particular kind of communication skill that separates good communicators from truly exceptional ones. It's not how they perform when everyone agrees, when the stakes are low, when the conversation flows easily. Anyone can communicate well in those conditions. The real test is what happens when someone pushes back hard, when the room turns skeptical, when the person across from you is frustrated, defensive, or openly hostile, when everything you've carefully prepared meets resistance instead of reception. These are the moments that define your communication ability. And they're the moments most people are least prepared for. Because when resistance appears, most people do one of two things. They either fold immediately, abandoning their position to restore comfort, or they dig in and argue harder, adding more evidence, more logic, more pressure, as if the problem were insufficient information rather than insufficient connection. Neither works. And understanding why neither works is the first step towards something that actually does. Why resistance rarely means what you think it means. When someone pushes back against your idea, your instinctive interpretation is probably, they disagree with me, and sometimes that's true. But more often, resistance is telling you something more nuanced. It might mean, I feel like you haven't considered my perspective. It might mean, I'm protecting something important to me that I haven't named yet. It might mean, I'm working with different information than you are. It might mean, I've been burned by something similar before, and I need more than logic to feel safe moving forward. None of these are disagreements in the abstract sense. They're personal responses to a specific situation, responses that require acknowledgement and understanding before they can shift. When you treat resistance as a logical problem to be solved with more logic, you miss the actual source of it, and you deepen it, because the person on the other side of you senses that you're not listening, that you're just waiting for them to finish so you can counter. The first move with resistance is always the same. Get curious before you get persuasive. The listen first strategy. This is counterintuitive enough that it bears emphasizing. When someone is resisting your idea, your job is not to respond, not yet. Your job is to understand genuinely, completely, without the half attention of someone already composing their rebuttal. Ask clarifying questions. Can you help me understand what specifically concerns you about this? Or, what would need to be different about this for it to feel workable to you? Or simply, tell me more about where that's coming from. Then listen, not to find the flaw in their argument, not to identify the moment you can jump in, Listen to actually understand what they're carrying into this conversation, what they're afraid of, what they've experienced before, what they value that feels threatened by your proposal. This takes discipline, because while you're listening, you might be hearing things that challenge your position. That's uncomfortable. But it's also information. Information that will make your eventual response far more effective than any prepared counterargument could be. People don't need to agree with you to feel heard, but they need to feel heard before they can genuinely consider agreeing with you. These are not the same moment, and trying to collapse them into one is why so many important conversations fail. The acknowledgement technique. Before you address any objection, name it explicitly, out loud, not to concede the point, not to agree that the objection is fatal to your case, but to demonstrate that you've actually received it, that it didn't just bounce off your prepared response and disappear. I completely understand why the cost looks prohibitive from where you're sitting. That's a legitimate concern, and I want to address it directly. You're right that the last time something like this was tried, it didn't go well. That context matters. These acknowledgments do something specific and measurable. They lower the emotional temperature of the conversation. Defensiveness requires an adversary to sustain itself. When you refuse to be adversarial, when you demonstrate genuine understanding of the other person's perspective, the defensive posture often relaxes on its own. This isn't a manipulation technique. It's an honesty technique. You're simply saying, I have heard you. Your concern exists in this conversation. Now let's work with it. Reframing without dismissing. Reframing is one of the most sophisticated tools in difficult conversations, and one of the most frequently misused. Done well, reframing takes someone's concern and shifts the angle from which it's viewed, opening up new possibilities without invalidating the concern itself. Done poorly, it feels like a debate trick, like you're trying to make their objection disappear through linguistic sleight of hand. The difference is in whether you've acknowledged the concern before you reframe it. If someone says, "This will take too long," "We don't have the runway for an extended timeline," a dismissive response would be, "Actually, it won't take as long as you think." A reframe would be, "The timeline is a real constraint. You're right about that. Let me show you how we'd stage this so the first phase delivers value within 6 weeks, and the longer timeline only applies to the extended rollout." Same underlying message, the timeline concern is addressable, but the second version acknowledges the reality the other person is working with, and then works with that reality rather than arguing against it. The reframe doesn't deny. It redirects. It says, given what you care about, here's a different way to look at this situation that might serve that thing you care about. Finding common ground. First, in almost every disagreement, there is a layer beneath the surface where the two parties actually agree. Shared values, shared goals, shared concerns about outcomes, even if they've arrived at completely different conclusions about what to do. Finding that layer and naming it out loud is one of the most powerful moves available to you in a difficult conversation. I think we both want this project to land well for the client. We're both worried about the team being stretched too thin. We're just reaching different conclusions about what to do about it. We're aligned on the goal here. The disagreement is about the path. When you establish common ground explicitly, you reframe the entire dynamic of the conversation. You're no longer opponents defending competing positions. You're two people who share something important, working through a disagreement about how to protect or achieve it. That shift from opposition to collaboration changes not just the tone of the conversation, but the cognitive state of everyone in it. Problem solving requires a different mental mode than defending. Common ground gets people into problem solving mode. Staying calm when the conversation heats up. The most technically skilled communicator becomes significantly less effective the moment they lose their emotional regulation. Anxiety narrows thinking. Anger collapses nuance. Defensiveness destroys listening. And all of these states are contagious. If you bring them into a difficult conversation, you'll amplify them in the other person. The physical practice matters here. When you feel tension rising, faster heartbeat, tightening in the shoulders, the urge to speak faster or louder, that's the signal. Not the signal to push harder, the signal to slow down. Breathe deliberately. Drop your speaking pace slightly. Keep your voice tone level. Not flat or cold, but steady. And here's a counterintuitive technique. Lower your volume slightly rather than raising it. Quieter, more deliberate speech in a heated moment draws people toward you rather than pushing them away. It signals confidence, not capitulation. Your calm is not just a personal asset. It's a gift to the conversation, a demonstration that clear thinking is possible here, that the heat isn't necessary, that there's a way through this that doesn't require anyone to lose. Chapter 9. Mastering Voice, Tone, and Delivery. Your words are the content. Your voice is the container, and the container shapes how the content is received in ways that most people dramatically underestimate. You can have the right words, the right structure, the right examples, and if your voice is flat, rushed, too quiet, or tonally mismatched to your message, the impact of everything else is cut in half. Maybe more? The voice isn't decoration. It's a primary communication channel, one that listeners use unconsciously and continuously to assess your credibility, confidence, and competence. The good news is that voice quality isn't fixed. Every element of it is trainable, and you don't need years of vocal coaching to see dramatic improvement. You need focused awareness and deliberate practice applied to a handful of specific elements. Breath and foundation. Everything about how you sound starts with breath. This isn't metaphor, it's physiology. Your voice is produced by air moving through your vocal cords. The quality of that air movement determines the quality of your sound. Most people breathe from their chest when they speak. Shallow, quick breaths that produce a thin, higher-pitched, sometimes slightly strained voice. This voice doesn't carry authority naturally. It has to work too hard to project, and under pressure it often tightens or wavers. Diaphragmatic breathing, breathing from the belly, letting the abdomen expand rather than the chest, produces a fuller, richer, more resonant sound that naturally carries more authority. It also slows you down slightly, which improves clarity. Practice this. Place one hand on your chest and one on your stomach. Breathe in. If your stomach hand moves more than your chest hand, you're breathing correctly for speaking. If it's the opposite, that's the pattern to retrain. 5 minutes of deliberate diaphragmatic breathing before an important conversation or presentation changes how you sound more immediately than almost any other single adjustment. Pace, the rhythm of understanding. The optimal speaking pace for most professional communication falls between 140 and 180 words per minute. Fast enough to maintain energy. Slow enough for comprehension. But pace isn't just about average speed. It's about strategic variation. Slow down for your most important points. Let them breathe. Give them space. Speed up slightly during background information or context that your listener likely already knows. This variation creates a natural rhythm that keeps listeners engaged. Their brain registers the pacing shifts and pays closer attention during the slower moments, correctly inferring that something significant is coming or has just arrived. The single most common pace problem is speaking too fast when nervous. Anxiety creates a biological urge to rush, to get through it, to fill the silence, to minimize the exposure, resist it. Deliberately slowing down when you feel anxious is uncomfortable, but it does something important. It breaks the physiological feedback loop. Slower speech sends a signal of calm to your own nervous system. It's one of the genuinely useful cases where acting the way you want to feel actually produces the feeling. Volume and emphasis. Volume modulation isn't about speaking loudly. It's about using strategic changes in volume to create contrast. And contrast is what captures and sustains attention. Raise your volume slightly on key points. Lower it deliberately for intimate or dramatic moments. The drop in volume, counterintuitively, often generates more attention than a rise because listeners lean in. They adjust. They work slightly harder to receive you, which means they're more engaged. Practice reading challenging material aloud and experimenting with volume variation. Notice where the natural landing points are. Notice how the same sentence feels different at different volumes and what each version communicates about the weight of the content. Pitch variation and monotone. Prevention. Monotone delivery is the single fastest way to lose your audience's attention, regardless of how compelling your content is. The human brain is wired to pay attention to variation and to disengage from sameness. A flat, unchanging pitch, even at a perfectly audible volume and reasonable pace, is neurologically boring. Pitch naturally rises with questions and uncertainty. It naturally falls with statements and confidence. Using falling pitch at the end of declarative statements signals conviction. You're not looking for approval, you're sharing a conclusion. Rising pitch at the end of statements, sometimes called upspeak, has the opposite effect. It makes declarations sound like questions. It signals uncertainty even when none exists. If this is a pattern in your speech, it's worth addressing specifically and deliberately. Read passages aloud. Vary your pitch consciously. Record yourself. The gap between how you think you sound and how you actually sound, revealed through recording, is one of the most valuable pieces of feedback you can give yourself. Chapter 10. Building Unshakable Communication Confidence. Everything in this guide, the structures, the vocabulary, the pauses, the vocal techniques, operates at roughly half its potential if the person delivering it doesn't believe they have the right to be heard. Confidence isn't the final polish on a communication skill set. It's the foundation everything else is built on, and yet it's also the element most people treat as either present or absent, something you either have or you don't. That's wrong. Confidence is not a trait. It's a practice. And like every practice in this guide, it can be built deliberately. Separating confidence from certainty. The most paralyzing misconception about communication confidence is the belief that it requires certainty, that you need to know everything, have the perfect answer, be impossible to challenge before you're allowed to speak with authority. This belief keeps intelligent, capable people silent in rooms where their voice would genuinely matter, and it misunderstands what confidence actually communicates. Real confidence doesn't signal, "I am always right." It signals, "I am clear about what I think, and I'm willing to own it." Those are completely different things. The first is arrogance pretending to be confidence. The second is intellectual honesty with a backbone. You can say, "I don't know," with complete confidence. You can say, "I'm not certain, but my current thinking is," with complete confidence. What you can't do, not without cost, is hide behind vagueness and call it humility. Preparation as a confidence generator. The single most reliable way to feel more confident before an important conversation is to prepare more specifically. Not scripting, not memorizing, thinking through. What are the 2 or 3 most important points you want to make? What's the most likely objection, and how do you genuinely address it? What's your first sentence? What outcome are you hoping for? 5 minutes of this kind of focused mental preparation does more for confidence than an hour of generic positive self-talk, because it gives your brain something real to hold on to, a structure, a direction, a sense of knowing where you're going, even if you can't control every turn along the way. Confidence, at its core, is a feeling of preparedness. Build the preparedness, and the confidence follows. The progressive exposure method. You build communication confidence the same way you build physical strength, through progressive challenge, not by jumping to the maximum load immediately, by systematically increasing the weight over time. Start with low-stakes conversations. Practice your new skills, your pauses, your structure, your cleaner vocabulary, in situations where nothing significant is at risk. With friends, in casual meetings, in small group settings, then deliberately seek out slightly higher stakes opportunities. Volunteer to explain something in a team meeting. Initiate a conversation with someone you'd normally avoid. Make a recommendation in a setting where you'd usually stay quiet. Each positive experience generates evidence that you can do this, evidence that your ideas land, evidence that the room doesn't collapse when you speak up. And that evidence accumulates, slowly at first, then with increasing momentum, into a genuine, sustainable confidence that isn't dependent on the stakes being low. The contribution mindset. Most communication anxiety is self-focused. How do I sound? What will they think of me? What if I say something wrong? The shift that changes everything is moving from self-focus to contribution focus. Instead of asking, "How will I come across?" ask, "What can I offer to this conversation that would genuinely be useful?" This reframe does something specific. It moves you from performer to participant. Performers are evaluated, participants contribute, and contribution, even imperfect, incomplete, uncertain contribution, is almost always more welcome than silence. Every person in every room has a combination of experiences, perspectives, and knowledge that nobody else in that room possesses in exactly that configuration. Your unique combination has value. The question is only whether you're willing to offer it. Chapter 11. Advanced Persuasion. Through clear communication. Most people think persuasion is a separate skill from communication, a specialized technique deployed in specific moments when you need to convince someone of something. It isn't. Persuasion is what happens when communication is done exceptionally well. It's not a layer you add on top of clarity. It's what clarity naturally produces when it's aimed at the right target, in the right way, at the right moment. And yet most people approach persuasion backwards. They start with their conclusion and try to pull others toward it, using logic, using pressure, using repetition, using emotional appeals that feel manipulative because they are. The whole posture is, I have decided, and now I need you to agree. The communicators who are genuinely persuasive, who influence outcomes consistently and durably, without burning relationships or credibility, start from a completely different place. They start with understanding. Persuasion starts with the other person's reality. Before you can move someone toward your position, you need to understand what's keeping them where they are. What do they value? What are they protecting? What experiences have shaped how they see this situation? What would they need to believe about the facts, about the risks, about the likely outcomes to feel comfortable moving in the direction you're suggesting? These aren't rhetorical questions. They're genuine inquiries. And the communicators who ask them, and actually wait for the answers, are almost always more persuasive than those who present the most polished argument. Because when someone feels genuinely understood, their resistance shifts, not necessarily to agreement, but to openness. And openness is all persuasion ever needs. The practical technique is simple. Before making your case, reflect back what you understand about the other person's perspective. From what you've shared, it sounds like the primary concern is the implementation risk rather than the concept itself. Is that right? This does three things simultaneously. It confirms your understanding. It demonstrates that you've been listening. And it often reveals nuances that change how you present your case. Connecting to existing values. One of the most consistently effective persuasion techniques is also one of the least used. Instead of asking people to adopt new values, show them how your proposal already aligns with values they hold. If someone values efficiency, frame your recommendation in terms of what it eliminates: unnecessary steps, redundant processes, wasted time. If they prioritize team well-being, show how your approach reduces pressure rather than adding to it. If they care about quality above all else, demonstrate how what you're proposing protects or enhances the standard they've already committed to. You're not changing their mind. You're showing them that their mind and your proposal are already pointing in the same direction. That's a completely different experience, and a far less resistant one. The preemption technique. Nothing builds persuasive credibility faster than addressing the objection before it's raised. When you name the likely concern yourself, before the other person has to bring it up, you signal something important. I have thought about this from your perspective, not just my own. That signal alone shifts the dynamic from adversarial to collaborative. The obvious question here is whether the cost is justified given the uncertain timeline. I want to address that directly. When you say something like this, the person who is about to raise that objection doesn't experience you as defensive. They experience you as thorough, and thorough people are trusted. Preemption also prevents the specific conversational pattern where an unaddressed objection grows in the listener's mind throughout your entire presentation until it's so large that nothing you say can overcome it. Name it early. Address it honestly. Then move forward. Question-based persuasion. The most durable form of persuasion isn't the kind where you convince someone of something. It's the kind where they convince themselves. And you created the conditions for that to happen. Strategic questions are how you create those conditions. What would need to be true for this to feel like the right move? This question invites the other person to define the criteria for their own decision. And often, in articulating those criteria, they discover that your proposal already meets them. What's the cost of staying with the current approach? This question shifts attention from the risks of change to the risks of inaction, a frame that most people haven't actively considered. How do you think the team would respond if this worked the way we're hoping? This question invites them to mentally simulate a positive outcome. And the brain that has simulated an outcome is already partially committed to it. These questions don't feel like persuasion. They feel like collaboration, because they are. You're genuinely helping someone think more clearly about a situation. And clearer thinking, when the evidence is on your side, almost always produces the conclusion you're hoping for. Chapter 12. The Digital Communication Edge. The principles of clear articulation don't change in digital environments, but the application does, significantly. And most people are running analog communication habits through digital channels and wondering why things keep getting lost or misunderstood. Digital communication removes layers. In person, you have voice, face, body language, physical presence, real-time feedback, and the ability to adjust in the moment. On a video call, you have a compressed frame and variable audio quality. In an email or message, you have words alone. When layers are removed, precision becomes more important, not more formal, more precise. Video call presence. The camera creates an intimacy that most people don't account for. On a video call, your face fills the other person's screen. Every micro-expression is visible. Every energy shift is perceptible. The gap between what you're feeling and what you're projecting is narrower than it is in a large room or across a conference table. This means your preparation matters more, not less. Your energy needs to be more deliberately calibrated. And your eye contact, looking into the camera lens, not at the screen, creates the experience of direct engagement that builds trust, even through a screen. Most people on video calls look at the other person's face on their screen, which means, from the other person's perspective, they appear to be looking slightly downward, not quite meeting anyone's eyes. This subtle misalignment, multiplied across every video interaction, creates a faint but persistent sense of disconnection. Look at the lens. It feels unnatural at first. It feels like you're looking at a black dot instead of a person. Do it anyway. The other person sees someone looking directly at them. That's worth the minor discomfort. Written communication precision. In written communication, email, messages, documents, you have no vocal tone, no facial expression, no body language. Everything that would normally soften or clarify or emphasize your words in person is absent. The words have to carry it all. This demands two specific disciplines. First, lead with your main point. Don't warm up. Don't provide 3 paragraphs of context before getting to what you actually need. Put the most important thing in the first 2 sentences. Give people the ability to understand what this communication is about and what you need from them before they've invested more than 15 seconds. Second, be more explicit about tone than you think you need to be. The sentence, "Let's revisit this approach," is neutral in person. Delivered with a collaborative tone, and a slight smile. It's an invitation. In text, depending on the reader's current state, it can read as criticism, dismissal, or frustration. If you want it to read as collaborative, say, "I think there might be a better path here. Would love to think through it together." The explicit warmth isn't weakness. It's precision. Asynchronous communication, recorded videos, voice messages, and written updates all share a critical characteristic. The person receiving them can't interrupt with questions. They can't ask you to clarify. They receive what you give them, and they work with that. This means you need to anticipate the questions before they're asked. Structure your asynchronous communication with a clear opening that signals what's coming, a logical progression through your main points, and a summary that reinforces what matters most and what, if anything, you need from the recipient. Think of it as leaving a complete thought rather than half a conversation. The extra minute of preparation that turns a rambling voice message into a clear, structured communication is one of the highest return investments you can make in your professional relationships. Chapter 13. Adapting your style without losing your voice. The final layer of communication mastery isn't learning a new technique. It's learning to apply everything you've developed with fluid, context-sensitive judgment, so that your articulation serves every person you speak with in every situation you face without ever becoming a performance. The goal isn't to have one communication style. It's to have a range of communication styles, all authentic, all grounded in your genuine perspective and values. Think of it like a skilled musician. They don't play every song at the same volume, tempo, and key. They read the room literally and adapt their performance to serve the music and the audience. But it's still unmistakably them. Their technique, their taste, their voice, all present, all the time, just expressed differently in different contexts. Expertise calibration is where most adaptation begins. The vocabulary you use with a domain expert and the vocabulary you use with someone approaching a topic for the first time should be noticeably different, not in precision, but in assumed knowledge and required context. With experts, you can move faster, assume foundations, and focus on nuance. With beginners, you slow down, define terms, use analogies, and build understanding sequentially. Neither mode is condescending. Condescension comes from attitude, not adjustment. You can explain something simply with complete respect for the person you're explaining it to. Professional hierarchy shapes not just formality, but focus. With senior leadership, lead with implications and outcomes, what this means for the organization, for the strategy, for the numbers, and provide detail only when asked. With peers, collaborative exploration and shared analysis are appropriate. With people you're mentoring or supporting, guidance and context are what serve them best. Emotional context adaptation might be the most human element of the whole skill set. Different people, in different moments, need different things from communication. Sometimes they need information. Sometimes they need clarity. Sometimes, before either of those, they need to feel understood. Developing the sensitivity to recognize which need is primary, and to lead with that, rather than with whatever you had planned, is what separates technically competent communicators from genuinely effective ones. Chapters 14 to 15, The Science of Words and Your Mastery, Blueprint, the psychology of how words influence people, is not manipulation science. It's attention science. Understanding how the human brain naturally processes information and aligning your communication with those natural processes rather than working against them. Simple language reduces cognitive load. When people don't have to work hard to decode your message, they can use that mental energy to actually engage with it. Every unnecessary complexity you remove is a gift to your listener's attention. Primacy and recency matter enormously. People remember what they hear first and what they hear last. The middle is where information goes to be forgotten. Design your communication accordingly. Put your most important points at the beginning and reinforce them at the end. Don't bury the headline. Concrete examples outperform abstract statistics. A single, specific, vivid example activates more of the brain and generates more genuine persuasion than a page of data. This doesn't mean ignoring data. It means anchoring data to human experience so it becomes real rather than theoretical. Positive framing motivates action. Negative framing motivates avoidance. Choose your frame based on what you want your listener to do. Move toward something or move away from something. Both are legitimate. Neither is more honest than the other, but they produce different responses, and understanding that lets you choose deliberately. Your mastery blueprint. Everything in this guide is a skill, and skills are built through a specific sequence: awareness, then deliberate practice, then integration, then automation. Awareness is where you are right now. You can see the patterns in your own communication and in others. You understand the frameworks. You know what you're building toward. Deliberate practice is what comes next, one skill at a time. 1 week focused on pauses, 1 week on verbal clutter, 1 week on structure. The sequential approach feels slower than trying to fix everything at once, but it's actually faster because each skill gets fully integrated before you move to the next one. Integration is when the skills start working together. When you naturally pause before responding, because that's just what you do now. When structure is the invisible architecture of every explanation you give. When your vocabulary choices are precise without effort, because precision has become your default rather than your exception. Automation is the destination, and it looks from the outside like effortless communication, like someone who was simply born knowing how to express themselves. But you'll know the truth. You'll know that every element of what looks effortless was built deliberately, practiced specifically, and earned through consistent commitment to the craft. The 1% of communicators who move rooms, who win trust, who shape outcomes, they're not a different category of human. They're people who decided that communication was worth taking seriously, who treated it as the high-leverage skill it actually is, who put in the focused work while everyone else was waiting to magically improve. You've done the first part. You've built the foundation. Now go use it.